Hello everyone, and welcome to this session on top 10 BI and data trends for 2023. My name is Dan Sommer and I'm the Senior Director of Market Intelligence here at Click. And as such, I have the great privilege to take the outside-in perspective and really look at the big thematic shifts that are going on every year. This year, we call it Calibrate for Crisis. At this moment in history, we find ourselves in a perfect storm where a lot of things are going on at the same time. We've got geopolitical, social, and economic concerns churning. I could turn on the news a typical day and they talk about the price of groceries going up, double digits. Perhaps they talk about the central bank raising interest rates by a full percentage point. Then they move on to the energy crisis and advising people to put aside money for the winter. And of course, and very sadly, we've got conflicts and increasingly isolationist tendencies as well. And in the economy, confidence is low and recession fears are high. Of course, this could all roll over or it could become really bad. We don't know where it will go, but we have to prepare. 3 recent books that I've read is showing some common denominators of a changing world order and the process of deglobalization. And as that is happening, we're experiencing rupture. Ray Dalio talks about the rise and fall of countries through an economic and social lens. And he explains that at any moment in time, one country is more powerful than all the others, and they tend to direct the world order. And when this country declines while another one rises, that is that intersection when the world is up for a change. Zehan is mapping out the collapse of globalization. Interestingly, he takes a more pessimistic view on China, who he says faces a massive demographic crisis. And then the third book, The Power of Crisis, identifies 3 big threats in the world: in climate change, the pandemic, and the threat of AI. And that countries will be forced to get together to solve these huge problems. That provides opportunity. And he gives an example of when Gorbachev met Reagan at a big summit in 1985. And we have to remember this was in the midst of the Cold War. Reagan basically asked Gorbachev, if we were invited by aliens, would you help us? And Gorbachev said, yes, of course. And that really set the tone and the spirit for that summit where they got a lot done. Now, we need to face a new reality of multipolarity, i.e. where multiple entities are jostling for power. And the different constituencies, they're going to use separate technology. And they're going to be governed by different political, social, and economic norms. And if power is getting distributed, so does data. And of course, multipolarity affects technology and by extension, data and analytics, which will become more fragmented. Number 1, we've got this tech decoupling going on, for example, in China, which means separate standards, separate protocols, and separate data centers. We may even see a potential splinternet. Then, of course, we have multi-cloud and hybrid cloud moving from a nice to have to an absolute must have. Speak to any large international financial institution, and they will confirm how complex the regulatory maze has become. Which brings me to the third point here, privacy debt. Many organizations are doing more today than what they're allowed to do. So they're going to have to backtrack and provide more regulatory compliance going forward. While other organizations are paralyzed by their conservatism, where they simply don't do enough to become competitive. Then we've got the mega trend of Web3 and distributed ledger and blockchain technologies. They might be going through a little bit of a trough of disillusionment right now with some recent scandals like FTX. But that doesn't take away from the fact that there's a lot of promising technology there which holds interesting prospects for the future of how to distribute and share and own data in a more distributed way. And then we've got the skills shortage. 250,000 professionals in Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia can't be accessed in the same way for outsourcing, really making a tough situation even worse. We also see VC funding going from boom to bust. Crunchbase shows that in Q3, VC funding declined by a whopping 53%. And that really is an indication of the whole sector moving from growth increasingly to value. Of course, we've seen a lot of disruptions in supply chains. And then finally, hyperconnectivity, things like IPv6, 5 and 6G, and low Earth orbits, think Starlink partnering with T-Systems, for example, provides a lot of opportunity to access more data at the edge. And perhaps the data center will then no longer be the center of your data. Instead, the edge becomes the center, reducing that data gravity. And Gartner confirms this by thinking that by 2025, more than half of your enterprise data will be created and analyzed outside of your data center or cloud. We're kind of in the best of times and the worst of times, like Dickens would have said. On one side, we're clearly seeing challenging times for spend. In fact, 7 out of 10 global tech leaders are currently concerned about the growing amount of technology investments that they have to make to remain competitive. In my conversations, I also hear a lot about CFOs and CEOs getting more involved in investments and in spending cycles. But the other side of that coin is that a lot of organizations are really banking on data and analytics as being one of the key catalysts and enablers during these challenging times. If 2008 and 2009 is any judge, then we really saw then that spending remained very, very strong on data and analytics. And now, according to Ernst & Young, 93% of companies are indicating that they plan to continue to increase their budgets in data and analytics, which is a real strong sign. We also hear from many surveys, for example, Gartner, that AI, ML, and BI and data analytics are considered the biggest game changers in the enterprise and are top of list for priorities. So net, CXOs rely on this technology because it helps them calibrate for crisis. Now, of course, we've had a dress rehearsal in 2020 with the pandemic, which made us invest and modernize our applications and our infrastructure. The flip side of that is it kind of left us in a chaotic tangle that may not look too dissimilar from a Jackson Pollock painting. But what we now need to do is really catch up around areas like connected governance, responsiveness, and of course cloud costs, which has taken many executives by surprise. In tough times, we also see that operational efficiencies are so important. We cannot allow any more fat in the system. Companies that can access the right information and take action on that at scale, they're gonna really prosper in these tough times. We have to calibrate for crisis, because when crisis becomes perennial, you need to make it a core competence. But in tough times, you have to make some hard calls on where to focus. In the coming year and beyond, we believe it will be so important to focus on 2 areas in particular. The first area is calibrating the decision. This is all about honing in on that decision accuracy to better react to, adapt to, and even anticipate unexpected events. Incremental improvements thousands of times a day for thousands of people are going to make a big impact on the total. And then we really need to calibrate the integration. Work to achieve connected governance and the ability to access, combine, and oversee distributed data sets. So the question then remains, where do we place our bets? Of course, that very much depends on the specific situation your organization is. I will now run through each one by one. Let's start with trend number one, which is all about real-time finding its use. I think we can all agree that there's been several compelling events in 2022 with the conflict in Ukraine, but also disruptions in manufacturing in China, which means that supply chains have been severely disrupted. Now, we were just recovering from disruptions during the COVID crisis when all of these compelling events hit. And anyone who's tried to order a car or construction materials or a computer, they know that this has really affected their daily lives. Personally, I ordered an EV back in October 2022, and all I know is going to arrive at some point in 2023. So disruptions can happen anywhere in the world, and they require an immediate response. And that means acting on contingency plans, and even if possible, pre-acting, i.e. using forecasts and scenarios to pivot before things begin to break down. Now, this has really driven the need for more up-to-date and real-time information so that we can react faster and potentially pre-act through anticipating better what will come. Now, the infrastructure to handle real-time data, it's been in place for some time, but the critical use cases and ultimate potential hasn't been fully explored. Now they should be. We're faced with managing inventory when raw materials are scarce and shipping is disrupted. And we need to pinpoint supply chain bottlenecks to backfill and work more effectively with partners. And we may have to shift resources to tackle new opportunities to address humanitarian needs when conflicts arise. And the pace of these issues is only going to accelerate. Another long-term, really big potential for real-time, of course, is this hyperconnectivity that I spoke about earlier. With more IoT devices at the edge through improved connectivity and Industry 4.0 edge use cases, we'll also see many more real-time needs for the future as well. And IDC clearly confirms this when they say that 60% of spending will be on streaming data pipelines. Trend number two is about decision velocity at scale. Because once you have that data velocity, i.e. real-time or near real-time data, that opens a lot of opportunities for decision velocity, a term coined originally by Ray Wong at Constellation Research. Imagine if you're a retailer and you see your cost base rising. You don't want to pass on all of those costs to your customers. A smarter thing instead would be to improve your operational efficiencies and gain market share through not rising the costs. And automation is one of the key technologies here, especially if you have volume and repeatability in your decisions and velocity. According to Gartner, 95% of decisions based on data can be at least partially automated. That really drives a lot of demand for technologies like application automation, robotic process automation, and process mining. But important to say, there is a human component here. Humans need to chaperone and curate these decisions both at the beginning and at the end of that automation chain. In addition, there's another part of the decision velocity here, and that is about the hundreds or perhaps thousands of professionals you have in your organization. We really need to shorten that time from data to decision to action. If we can do that for thousands of people several times a day, that on the whole will leave a much more efficient organization. Longer term, of course, all of that data literacy investment should pay off as well. And we will see new roles emerging, I think, with a focus on decision innovation. Roles like chief decision officer, decision designer, and perhaps decision engineers. Of course, these are tasks with automating decisions as much as possible, but also tackling the biggest and hairiest decisions that an organization face, bringing together stakeholders to solve these tough problems. And the final point for the long term is that decision velocity will leave a big data trail with patterns that can be analyzed. And that opens a lot of opportunities for decision mining. Trend number 3 is about optimizing across low code and high code. In recent years, there's been a lot of talk about the emergence of low code tools for building applications, which really gives very powerful access for regular business professionals and business technologists to compose and build really powerful applications. This affects, for example, application automations where more people can build interesting chains of events, or AutoML when citizen data scientists get access to really powerful algorithms, or data transformations where more people can build interesting things in the data pipeline. But on the other hand, some organizations have an abundance of programmers and app developers who simply want prompts that they can code in. And this is particularly the case in data engineering and data science, as those fields now get reinvented for the cloud. To cater for these needs, we've seen the emergence of high-code tools that provides templates to cater for maximum productivity for coders. These two camps, frankly, will always exist, though many use cases will gradually evolve from high code to low code as repeatable workflows are gradually identified and markets mature. Still, the choice shouldn't be between low code and high code. Instead, it should be code optimization, focusing on the highest productivity and best business outcomes given the available skill sets that you have. Another interesting emergence is GitHub Copilot based on GPT-3. It translates plain English natural language into code. And GitHub estimates that Copilot generates roughly 30% of the application code created on their sites already. And IDC predicts that by 2023, 60% of net new applications will be developed with no-code, low-code platforms, up from 30% today. Trend number 4 is about the human-machine arms race. Slightly dramatic title, but it's really about the development of natural language. In the summer of 2022, a Google engineer claimed that one of the company's chatbots, named Lambda, had achieved consciousness. He was later fired for breaching security policies, but it really does show how far machines have come. When it comes to natural language models, they're becoming bigger and bigger, and they've been trained on massive troves of data using deep neural network machine learning. And they've reached a paradigm shift. We spoke about GPT-3 earlier. It's so capable that it's spawned a number of services, from code optimization, like we spoke about, to actually writing marketing copy, to mimicking the voices of authors, like Kafka and Hemingway. And according to Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, there are now 5 to 6 global developments even bigger than GPT-3. And these models are trained on even larger data sets. And where those will take us, we can only imagine. We may actually not be too far off that Rubicon where machines can finally pass the Turing tests. And according to some sources, GPT-4 will hit this year. So what is the impact then? Well, in the space of data and analytics, natural language capabilities will have huge implications for how we query information, natural language query, or how it's interpreted and reported, natural language generation. And we can have a conversation with our data in a whole different way. We'll find not only the data we're looking for, but increasingly also the data we hadn't thought to ask for. Now, of course, all of this needs to come with the appropriate governance. Forrester research actually predicts that in the next 10 years or sooner, based on the groundbreaking innovation in AI, Turing bots will be created by several tech vendors. Trend number 5 is about data stories that actually compel action. Because for decades, the mantra has been get the right amount of information at the right time to the right people. That's more important now than ever. But when data is distributed and it's in so many different places, it's tougher and tougher to do. Data storytelling has been touted as the way to get data to make more sense to more users, because it can reach us on a different emotional level and compel us to act. But data storytelling needs to be so much more than just adding charts to an infographic or a PowerPoint. It's much better if it's connected to action. Having the right slices of small data at the right time is more useful. You want to predict what will happen next and suggest best actions with AutoML. You want to use alerting, reporting, and automation to bring these stories into workflows. And then you want to embed not just the dashboards, but micro stories into the systems where people actually work. All of this will move data storytelling from insights you could act on to insights you do act on. And Gartner is predicting that by 2025, data storytelling will be the most widespread way of consuming analytics, and 3/4 of that will be stories automatically generated using augmented analytics techniques. Okay, with trend 6 now, we're actually moving to calibrating the integration. And the first trend here is market consolidation opens new opportunities. Now, I recently spoke to a very big telecommunications company. And before they embarked on their transformation program, they said that they were only using 5% of their data. I think many companies are in this same situation, and it's not by choice. Because part of the problem is the fragmentation, the disjointed systems, and the low integration between them. There's lots of overhead, and it's very slow time to value. In this increasingly fragmented world, we're actually seeing a trend in the opposite direction of convergence. We're seeing the consolidation of previously siloed systems, including data integration, management, analytics AI, visualization, data science, and automation. And as that is happening, there's a lot of cross-pollination and synergies that can be done. Now, all of this is really facilitated and enabled by more common standards and APIs that enable interoperability. But when a vendor operates across more segments, convergence is even easier. And this isn't about going all in on one data stack, which can lead to vendor lock-in and compromise compliance. Instead, choose platforms that can work with multiple stacks and consolidate the data across them. Combining these functions opens opportunities that weren't possible before. Not only does it enable information producers and information consumers to meet, increasingly, you can start with the outcome or the product that you had in mind, and you can work your way back in the chain and in the pipeline and make sure that is enabled. So for example, if you want to reduce churn by 10%, that should be your goal and your outcome, and it becomes much easier to facilitate that outcome. So the big impact here is that the move towards consolidation on the supply side is met by the demand side. As we've touched on, in challenging times, CFOs and CEOs tend to get more involved in the business, and they want to see that return on investment articulated very clearly. And also, this step will help drive pricing models away from per user towards more the value and the outcome generated. After all, you can't always predetermine who in your organization should use what tool when you don't know where the next challenge will come from. Instead, facilitate general access to tools and platforms in a governed way and build from there. Trend number 7 is what's old is new again in the cloud. In the year of 1843, a certain Henry Ellsworth, the US Patent Commissioner, said, and I quote, "The advancement of the arts from year to year taxes our credulity and seems to presage the arrival of that period when human improvement must end," i.e., anything worth inventing will have soon been thought of. While that was clearly not the case, it is true that many older ideas seem new when applied to a new context. Let's bring this to our world. In the on-premise world, we used to have these data warehouses and data lakes. And what they did was they created a number of adjacent markets, right? Like data quality, metadata management, semantic layers, etc. And during the pandemic, organizations, as we know, they've quickly modernized applications and their data, and they've moved that to the cloud. And that means we had a big data gravity shift, right? From on-premise to the cloud. As these changes mature, many of the same issues from the on-prem world are showing up again. For example, after you adopt a cloud data warehouse or lake, you may need to tackle data movement, transformation, metadata catalogs, and so on. Now, these needs are driving a very big investment in a multitude of software segments around warehouses and lakes, including semantic layers and data integration, movement, metric stores, observability, etc. And frankly, this has created a wild west of startups. They often dub themselves, quote, the modern data stack. And this is fueled by venture capital, each going after one specialization. And certainly some winners will emerge among this pack, but the vast majority may disappear as industries mature and consolidate. And I think this trend will accelerate as we're seeing, as I mentioned earlier, VC funding going from boom to bust with a 53% decline year on year, according to Crunchbase. In other words, expect a big wave of mergers and acquisitions as these small vendors, some of them will look for the exit. It happened in the on-prem world, and it will likely happen again in the cloud. So what's then the impact for all of us? Well, from a cost perspective, it's not sustainable for organizations to work with a wide plethora of niche vendors. Fortunately, many of these features will be recreated in the larger integrated data and analytics platforms. And as cloud markets mature, managers may abandon architectures that rely too much on too many immature startups that struggle. The silver lining here is that this will shift talent from the vendor side increasingly to the end user side. Many of these startups will be used as a source both for hiring technology, but also hiring talent, which may alleviate some of the most urgent shortcomings that we see. Trend number 8 is about X-Fabric, holding connected governance together. The discussion in recent years has been about data fabric and data mesh and data hubs. These are all different methodologies and technologies to try to harmonize distributed data sets through some sort of connective tissue or semantic layer. But for connected governance, we need so much more than that. We spoke earlier about the millions of builders. Remember the low code, high code trend. For those, we need other fabrics, or what I call X fabrics. This could include application fabrics, BI fabrics, i.e. BI on BI, and algorithm fabrics. And right now, these methodologies are even less mature than data fabric. Being able to reuse data and analytic assets is critical, and it spans models, scripts, and analytics content. And the need to reuse also underscores the importance of having a catalog, as well as evolving role. common APIs will make it more possible to have more modularity, more composability for catalogs to provide that oversights spanning multiple artifacts. The impact here is that for connected governance, we need more and more connective tissue and X fabrics. In a distributed world, orchestration becomes even more important to calibrate the integration. You also need to certify artifacts based on how trustworthy they are. For example, through watermarking, based on different thresholds. It's all about strengthening the knowledge about the artifacts in the catalog with more knowledge about the data, applications, BI dashboards, algorithms, and more. Things like certification, auto-classification, lineage, glossary, or collaboration will take us to that ideal but hard to reach goal of more universal metadata in our organizations. IDC says that by 2023, 60% of global 2,000 enterprises will have a data control plane architecture. Trend 9 is about AI ML moving deeper into the data pipeline. Now, we mentioned in Trend 6 that analytics, automation, and AI is increasingly converging and overlapping with each other. And in this process, of course, they're cross-pollinating and there are synergies to be exploited. And that generates new insights that weren't possible before. Can we move some of these components deeper into the data pipeline before an application or a dashboard has even been built? It could, for example, automate anomaly detection, take advantage of self-healing, use just-in-time deployment, and find risky attributes such as personally identifiable information data. Algorithms would also be able to crawl the data and surface insights outside of that hypothesis that you have. And finally, automated annotations and tagging could drive better engagement with less skilled integrators. But there are even bigger ways that this could benefit organizations. According to the 2022 DICE Tech Job Report, the increase in job postings for master data engineers between 2021 and 2022 was over 300%. Now, we don't know what the future will bring, but automating more of the rote tasks in data engineering will obviously have huge gains. It can also have other positive repercussions. Ultimately, using AI in data management would shift that perennial 80-20 distribution between preparing the data and analyzing it. It's been like that for 20 years. So, more AI in the data pipeline doesn't mean that humans won't be involved, though. After all, humans are exceptionally good at synthesizing complex problems with multiple component parts. But more AI in the pipeline will automate some of the more menial tasks done by data engineers and scientists today, and that's going to help them prepare more data and focus more on impactful work. Through 2024, manual data integration tasks will be reduced by up to 50% through the adoption of data fabric design patterns that support augmented data integration, according to Gartner. Okay then, we've reached the 10th and final trend, which we call the rise of derivative and synthetic data. We know that data is a liquid asset. Someone's gold could be another one's garbage, especially in this fragmented world that we're in. And repurposing data has become easier than ever with data lakes and schema on read and the different transformations that you can do, putting data into different formats. Data that has been transformed, processed, aggregated, correlated, or operated on is often referred to as derivative data. This is easier to do than ever. But now, with new privacy laws, which I've gone through, and new integrity issues, it's becoming essential to obfuscate data, perhaps even further in some cases, for privacy and regulatory purposes. In other situations, you simply don't have enough data, or there is no data at all. The lack of available user data, for example, can be very harmful for small and medium-sized businesses who just don't have enough data to train their AI models with vast data sets. And then an enterprise may want to run experiments and what-if analysis for different cases, simulations. And this is very common, for example, with financial crime and fraud analysis in financial institutions. In all of these scenarios above, synthetic data is an emerging option. Synthetic data is data that has not been generated from real operations. Synthetic data can also be video, image, or sound. You can more and more just artificially render media with properties close enough to real-world data. Images created by so-called generative adversarial networks, or GANs, can generate new data with the same statistics as the training set. Sometimes it turns out that the AI is actually better than the real data. This was the case when a team of researchers at MIT and Boston University found that a synthetic data set of 150,000 video clips trained machine learning models better than models trained on real data. Or the quality is in the eye of the beholder. There was controversy recently when an artwork made by artificial intelligence won first place at the Colorado State Fair's Fine Arts competition. And this sparked controversy about whether AI-generated art can be used to compete in competitions. So the net is, thanks to a number of factors, including data reuse, testing, privacy laws, missing data, and the need for data to train AI models, we'll see more derivative and synthetic data. And Gartner thinks that by 2030, synthetic data will completely overshadow real data and AI models. So there you have it. There are very big changes going on in society. We don't know how it's all going to pan out, but we have to prepare for it. We now have this multipolar world that we have to adjust to, and we do that best through building in crisis management as a core competence so that we can calibrate for crisis. This will help us react and anticipate better. And data and analytics is absolutely front and center and a huge opportunity for data and analytics professionals. It is the foundation for calibrating the decision, which ultimately will improve decision accuracy thousands of times a day for thousands of people, and calibrating the integration so that we can really integrate that complex web that we have. So let's sum up the 10 trends that we think will have immediate effects for your organization that will actually have an impact today, but also some longer-term benefits. The first one is about real-time data finding its use. In the short term, it's really going to be able to address those supply chain shortcomings so that you can react and pre-act in a much better way. Longer term, I think we'll see more and more data at the edge, and real-time and near real-time data will be able to address that. Then we've got decision velocity at scale. This is going to affect your operational efficiencies today through automation, but also through improving the data literacy and the time from data to action for individuals every day, multiple times a day. Longer term, this is going to, of course, leave a digital footprint which you can utilize for decision mining. Then we've got optimizing across low code and high code. And this will optimize coding for all of the different constituents in your organization, from the business users to the most sophisticated. Longer term, we see huge innovation when it comes to actually automatically generating code from natural language. And this brings us to the human-machine arms race, where we see drastic improvements when it comes to natural language technologies that initially will change the paradigm for how democratized access is when we're inquiring and talking and conversing with data. Longer term, it has society shifting impact that is actually hard to oversee. Then we see data stories that compel action, that will give you the right information at the right time to the right people. And if we can tie that to action and micro stories that hit you at the right time, that will be a huge benefit. Moving to calibrating the integration, we see that the consolidation that's going on in the market opens new opportunities. Initially through the synergies that can be reached and the cross-pollination between connecting all of these previously siloed technologies. Longer term, it will enable us to have a much more outcome-oriented discussion for what we want to achieve. We also see, related to that what's old is new again in the cloud. As we've moved our data to cloud-based data warehouses and cloud-based data lakes, there are all these adjacencies that happen again. So far, it's run by a wild west of a plethora of different companies. More and more of that will be integrated into platforms and ecosystems. We also see with the VC crunch that this will provide probably an opportunity for acqui-hires in the tech sector. We see X-Fabric holding connected governance together. And this should be about so much more than just the data. It should be about your applications, about your algorithms, and about BI on BI. Longer term, it's going to drive towards that goal of universal metadata across the different artifacts in your organization. We see AI moving deeper into the data pipeline, and that will drastically reduce the DI tasks that the very expensive and hard to come by data engineers will have to do. Longer term, we might even be able to flip that perennial 80-20 distribution that we've seen for at least 2 decades. We see the rise of derivative and synthetic data, where reuse of different data assets will provide new opportunities for privacy, for risk and scenario modeling in this fragmented world that we're in. Longer term, synthetic data will actually be a game changer for AI models. So there you have it. In these challenging times, there will be prioritizations done, and this is the list that we've come up with. But we suggest that you list your biggest priorities and perhaps create some sort of a swim lane where you can then discuss what effects those priorities will have short term and long term, as well as the repercussions for people, process, and technology to make them as successful as possible. If you do that, then you're optimizing and you're calibrating for crisis in these uncertain times that we're in. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned as we have a live Q&A session coming up very shortly. Hello, and thank you so much for all of the questions that have come in. There's been a lot of interaction. Several thousand people attended the webinar, so I'm chuffed. I have looked at and tried to answer as many questions as possible, and I'm going to focus on a few of them here. Those that I don't answer here, you can email me at dan.sommer@click.com, and we can continue the dialogue. Thanks again. So here's a question on, is the modern stack just a VC-backed bubble of startups that will consolidate and or be acquired by more traditional players? I do think that is absolutely the case. There's going to be exceptions here, of course, but given these two dynamics, A, of a crunch in VC, where we saw that significantly decline in 2022, and B, the skills shortages that are needing to get filled, especially in the end user sector, and C, that many kind of executives are looking at buying and they prefer to buy from platform vendors. I think that combination is going to make so many of these small VC-backed vendors disappear over time. Second question here, how do you think insecurity will be addressed, included when making decisions going forward? That's such an important question. You don't just want to have a computer says no type of approach to answering queries, and that becomes even more important going forward as AI is going to give a bunch of suggestions to you. I think critical thinking and sort of questioning the question is a very human trait and something that we need to get focused on. So maybe AI can help here a little bit. It's a very human and cultural trait that needs to be built into an organization. So you don't just have a yes-saying organization. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to spot the data quality errors, for example, that come up. And in many cases, analysis isn't enough. You need to do synthesis of stuff that's outside the answer that you have. I have a question here about how to handle sensitive data with the growth of cloud. Will offline use of Qlik still be used in the future? Yes, absolutely. Certainly Qlik and many other organizations, I think as well, need to focus on the offline data as well. There are just too many regulations out there, many regions where you want to touch the server, that's the culture, and therefore client managed and cloud will need to coexist for the foreseeable future and move at the pace with which customers feel comfortable. So certainly from our organization's perspective and some others I suspect as well, we don't want to push anyone into like a binary choice, especially with the US Cloud Act, comparing with the sort of Privacy Shield and GDPR and everything that's going on in this multipolar world that I talked about. So yes, on that question. How do you build out a data user story? What could be the requirements? So that's a great question. I think there are a lot of data storytelling tools out there that can be used. At the same time, you want to focus in on, again, that critical thinking. Make sure that the narrative doesn't overshadow the actual exploration of data. It's so easy to present a story with highly subjective data stories and lose track of actually questioning the data. So I think that balance needs to be struck, which is very important. And then tied to action through those things that I spoke about, notifications, alerting, reporting, etc. Build it into the automations, and then it's going to be much more actionable. RPA and BI. Well, I think one of the trends here was supply chain, and we see some very exciting things here when using analytical tools and basically combining those with automation, which makes the answers much more real time. So very cool use cases coming forward with partnerships between BI vendors and RPA vendors, and also process mining vendors, which essentially is looking at the digital footprints that you have in your organization and basically improve how automation is being done. I think that triad is super exciting to build BI into the process. Is Qlik planning to enter the realm of AI in regards of expansion of data and analytics? Well, I think yes, they are inseparable these days. AI, BI, data management, data science, as I said, those are all converging with each other. The buyers are looking for those to converge with one another. And certainly Qlik and many other organizations are building AI into many of the features that we have. Blockchain and data and analytics. Well, this is an interesting one. It's so far mostly been used for things like smart contracts and cryptocurrencies, but there is an overlap in the Venn diagram, a big overlap with data and analytics, especially when you have heavy applications for kind of distributed data storage, like we spoke about, data sharing, data privacy, data observability, and lineage. So when those aspects are important, and also security, then distributed ledger and blockchain-like technologies are focused on. And there are interesting things like Solid, for example, the Solid framework for security, and DBMS is starting to appear as well, but they're in early stages. What industries are applying derivative data? So here we see many companies like Amazon, for example, they're using synthetic data to train their language system. When it comes to industries, we see health insurance companies generating synthetic data. Large financial institutions, of course, are using this to improve fraud detection and build out their scenario modeling. Pharma companies are using it for clinical research, and insurance companies are testing synthetic data for predictive analytics. So many use cases coming forward. The skills shortage, you spoke about the skills shortage is a question here, but recently there's been big layoffs. How do you reconcile that? Yeah, I mean, things are moving so quickly right now. Just in the last month, there's been several layoffs in the tech sector, and that will, of course, balance out a little bit the very drastic skills shortage that we've seen. However, I do think that we'll see also a movement from the tech sector, where most of the layoffs are happening, into the end user sector, where the skills shortages are pretty extreme. You know, when the markets are hot, many companies tend to get created from efforts inside large end user organizations. And when tech sector is a little bit less hot, many people move back into the end user sector. So I think that's a dynamic that we can see. How do you think GPT chat will affect the space? Is a question here. Well, I think it first and foremost will show the art of the possible of what can be done with natural language processing and generation. I think GPT chat, there's like a before GPT chat and after GPT chat. It had such a huge impact and made people realize that AI is actually for real. It's not just a buzzword. And I think it will help in synthesizing, especially external data, but more work is needed for the internal data that we have in organizations. Also, it needs to overcome that some of the answers are actually wrong sometimes. So it's going to have a renewed focus on data quality and data governance, especially. If the data underneath is garbage, so will the answer be. It just surfaces it for you. So that's interesting, but definitely it will affect this space. And then final question here, what are the biggest trends you spoke about last year that didn't come to fruition? I think I did this last year as well, and one of the trends that I highlighted was data mesh. While that is still interesting and many organizations are looking at it, because of these kind of regulatory dynamics that we've seen and many executives kind of being more focused on data and analytics, it's become more centralized. And I think this kind of very decentralized approach of data mesh isn't really fully enterprise class and enterprise ready to be rolled out at scale in organizations. So therefore, that's probably one where like a more centralized approach has been premiered over the data mesh approach, which kind of talks about data being a product and the data engineering teams sitting very locally in the business units. Okay, I want to give you a little bit of time back before your next meetings at the top of the hour. So I'm going to stop answering the questions here. There are more coming through, and I will try to answer those. But again, thank you so much for attending this webinar. There's also an ebook in different languages that you can download here. Yeah, just contact me on dan.sommer@click.com, and I'll try to answer any question that you may have. Thanks again for attending. Bye.